live long and prosper. So in this video series, I'm going to be talking through the social justice elements of every episode of the original series of Star Trek. The thing that inspired this project was actually a Fox News article which argued that Star Trek has in some way betrayed its traditional commitment to sort of political neutrality or middle ground by embracing progressive politics. In this series, we're going to see that Star Trek has always embraced progressive politics, and it's always been aspirational for social justice in various senses. I am taking a broad perspective on social justice here, so that may include multiple different types of social justice, whether that's racial, whether that's economic, whether that's religious, whether that's abilities, gender and sexuality, anything broadly considered. I will go through every episode. Some of the episodes I will interview fellow Trekkies and talk with them about it. And then below, in the descriptions, I will give you additional information about the episodes, particularly their original air date, who wrote the screenplay, and who directed that episode. I also want to dedicate this series to my dad, Michael Allen Zapkin. He was an OG Trekkie from back in the day, and it was watching the original series with him that I came to love Star Trek. In this video, we're going to talk about the episode This Side of Paradise. Now, this is an episode that overtly takes on 1960s counterculture and raises particular concerns about it. So basically, the Enterprise crew comes to a particular planet that had an agricultural colony established 3 years earlier. The problem is the planet is being bombarded by bertolt rays, which destroy living tissue, apparently except for plants, which is not really explained, but not that big of a problem. So, the Enterprise crew figures that they are going to find the colonists all dead, and they're gonna, make their report about the death of the colonists. Quite to the contrary, they find the colonists not only alive, but in perfect health. Like, perfect health. Not even like they're in good health for people living on an obscure agricultural colony on a distant planet. Like, perfect. Like, the leader of the expedition, Sandoval, McCoy checks him out medically and discovers that the scar tissue on his lungs from a disease as a child is gone. His appendix, which was removed surgically, has grown back, like perfect health. What also happens is that Spock is reunited with a woman he knew on Earth 6 years earlier, and she was in love with him. He obviously, as a Vulcan, has no emotions, etc., etc. But he gets blasted by some spores from a particular plant that lives on this planet. And those spores allow him to have emotions. So he starts basically having a love affair with this woman. Other members of the Enterprise landing party get blasted with these spores, and they decide that they're all going to join this agricultural colony. They start beaming plants up to the Enterprise. The spores spread through the air vents, etc., etc. And pretty soon, everybody in the crew, except for Captain Kirk, is under the influence of the spores. They're all transporting down to join the agricultural colony, and Kirk is alone on the Enterprise. He gets spored himself, and as he's about to beam down, he basically wills himself out of being spored. He is able to somehow make himself violently angry, and that apparently destroys the influence of the spores. So Kirk realizes that's the answer. He beams Spock up to the ship, where he proceeds to insult Spock for a bit until Spock gets really, really angry and attacks him. Then the influence of the spores is gone from Spock. So they rig up a sonic device that's going to emit a sort of low-frequency hum across the entire planet. It's going to enrage everybody on the surface, and they will start fighting one another, and that will get rid of the influence of the spores, and everybody can transport back up. They can take the colonists with them off to the Starbase 27, I think it is, which is what Kirk has been ordered to do. Anyway, that's essentially what happens. So, this is, again, a critique of 1960s counterculture in two major ways. One is that there was a big sort of back-to-nature movement. So this is an agricultural colony, right? They are here to farm. Sandoval even says to Kirk, our philosophy is a simple one, that man should go back to an earlier, more simple time. So this is the 1960s back to nature movement, or back to the earth movement. And there were a lot of communes and agricultural colonies, agricultural collectives, and things like this that were formed in the 60s and 70s in an attempt to get back to nature and these kinds of things. And so that's one element of what's going on in this episode, in this side of paradise, is this return to nature thing. And the critique of that comes really in two major elements. One is when, I think he's a botanist, gives Kirk a report about the quality of the soil on this planet. He says, Sandoval said they can grow anything, and they can, but for an agricultural colony, they're just not growing very much. Like, the colonists have planted enough stuff to sustain themselves, but they're not producing any extra. So there's no idea of exports, no idea of making any sort of money by providing agricultural products to other planets or star bases or anything like this, which is not normally the way that an agricultural colony works. It's not normally a subsistence economy, but that's essentially what these people have created. And that's mostly because they have, under the influence of the spores, they have no desire to do anything beyond to sort of survive and be happy. The other element, the second anti-countercultural element of this, is the spores themselves. Obviously, drugs was a major, major aspect of 1960s and 70s counterculture. And Kirk, I think it's Kirk. It's either Kirk or McCoy who says this is what was known in the vernacular as a happiness pill. And a lot of experimentation with drugs in the 60s and 70s was about trying to be happy, trying to be more creative, trying to find peace, etc., etc. And the influence of the spores alters people's brain chemistry, alters the way that people think about themselves and about the world. And so essentially you have that kind of mellow, that kind of peacefulness that particularly the hippie movement really sought. The problem is that it is chemically induced, and so in that sense it's not real. And this also goes along, actually this is also connected with the second instance we get of how limited this agricultural colony has been in terms of achieving any sort of goal. Because at the end, Sandoval, when he fights Dr. McCoy briefly, and then the influence of the spores is gone, he's like, we've done nothing here. So this is kind of the critique. This wraps up the critique both of the Back to Nature movement and of the drugs element of this storyline. This idea that, yes, we were happy, yes, we were surviving, but we weren't achieving anything. We weren't making any progress. We weren't improving. We weren't even making enough to sell product. We were just sort of in stasis, really. And so this is Star Trek's critique of the drug culture of the 1960s, is that whether or not this is a fair critique, I'm not gonna express an opinion necessarily, but the critique here is essentially that through the pursuit of happiness or enlightenment, open-mindedness, peace, whatever it is, via the use of drugs, you limit your ability to actually achieve things of value. Again, whether or not that's a fair critique, I'm not going to say. But the other thing that's worth thinking about here is this is another episode, like The Return of the Archons, where Kirk takes it upon himself to say, even though you are happy, even though you are at peace, even though you do not want to change the way that your society is running, I am going to destroy that society in the name of your freedom. And actually, the woman that Spock is in love with, Layla Kalomi. Sorry, I had to just look up what her last name was. So Layla Kalomi, Layla, who is in love with Spock, and under the influence of the spores, he can be in love with her. When she actually beams up to the Enterprise, still under the influence of the spores, but after Spock no longer is, the influence of the spores is broken in her because she is heartbroken over no longer being able to have that relationship with him. And she asks Spock the question, this is for my good? And I think that's a really, really important question. Again, both with this episode and an episode like The Return of the Archons, why does Kirk get to make the decision to destroy another civilization or another society's happiness and contentment just because they aren't free and whatever it is? Just because they're under the influence of Landru or the influence of these spores or whatever it is. Why does Kirk get to destroy that peace, that contentment that they unquestionably feel?